Hello, friends. How are you doing today? We are making progress, slowly but surely. A better video today, I promise. We're making progress. William James, Pragmatism. We are on an essay called The Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life. The author calls it a paper that he's presenting, The Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life. Hopefully some of this will apply even if you're not a philosopher, but perhaps even if you're just interested in life in general. So what he tries to do in this presentation is he tries to establish what is the basis for a moral life, or to be, as he calls it, a moral philosopher. Well, I'm a philosopher, so I'm interested in how to be a moral philosopher. Here we go. He determines, I'm going to read from page 223, and hopefully this is going to make sense to you. I'm going to go through this quickly, okay? We on this terrestrial globe, so far as the visible facts go, are just like the inhabitants. He gives an analogy previously as if there was a world with only two people in it. If there was only two people in a world, then it would have as much moral character as the world we live in with millions and billions of people. This is his argument. He said would have just as much moral as that hypothetical situation. Whether a God exists or whether no God exists, in yon blue heaven above us, bent, he says, we form at any rate an ethical republic here below. He says, so whether there's a God or whether there's no God, we create this ethical republic, he calls it. And the first reflection which this leads to is that ethics have as genuine and real a foothold in a universe where the highest consciousness is human, as in a universe where there is a God as well, which is a false statement, an ignorant statement that he makes. Here he says, in quotes, the religion of humanity affords a basis for ethics as well as theism does. Another false statement. Whether the purely human system can gratify the philosopher's demand as well as the other is a different question, which we ourselves must answer before we close. So he says that whether there's a God above or whether there isn't a God above, he said we still live in a moral environment. And he says that the religion of humanity is what he calls it. And this is his foundation of atheistic humanism, which he sets forward in this essay, The Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life. It's not hard to see where this type of thinking has led to, and which we, citizens of 2022, have inherited. We have inherited this type of foundational atheistic thinking that affects many, many, many people down through the years since that time, since this was published around 1900. So it's been over 120 years, and his ideas still percolate through to the atheists of today. And you can see what type of results that has resulted in. A lot of aberrant behavior, I would say. And he goes on to argue that the essence of good is simply to satisfy demand. He mentions that on page 226. I'll just throw in a little side note here. This is over 120 years ago, and he's making some comparisons about what a person can desire. He says a fellow cannot have both Amelia and Henrietta. He cannot have both. He must choose one or the other. And then he's making these different analogies of what a person can have and cannot have. And then he goes on to say, can he have the dear old Republican Party or a spirit of unsophistication in public affairs? He cannot have both. And I thought that was cute, that the dear old Republican Party was still an issue in the year 1900. But that's just a little side note for you. Let's move forward and see what other conclusions he comes up with. he goes on to page 231. He says that if you have a philosophy and you mix it with this, he calls it dogmatic temper, with absolute distinctions and unconditional thou shalt nots, he's describing religion. It changes a growing, elastic, and continuous life into a superstitious system of relics and dead bones, he calls it. In point of fact, there are no absolute evils, and there are no non-moral goods. And the highest ethical life, however few may be called to bear its burdens, consists at all times in the breaking of rules which have grown too narrow for the actual use. What a false and ignorant statement to make. Do you see how he drifted off? Because he declared himself to be his own God. He said, the moral standard that I'm going to adapt is only what I can perceive. And he throws off what he considers to be the shackles of a celestial God. First of all, the problem was he had absolutely no understanding of the God of the Bible. He had no understanding of the God of the Christian. He professes to have knowledge of it, but by his words, he reveals that he has complete ignorance. He refers to it as a superstitious system of relics and dead bones. Probably once again obtusely directing his energy towards the Catholic Church. And he says that there are no absolute evils. Well, obviously, he's never experienced anything close to absolute evil, or he wouldn't make that statement. Even if he got anywhere near some serious evil in his life, he wouldn't make that statement because he would know there is absolute evil. He says that we should seek incessantly with fear and trembling so to vote and to act as to bring about the very largest total universe of good which we can see. By his own definition, he thinks that we can just evaluate and determine what is good through our own efforts. You can see how he has fallen into absolute and total self-sufficiency, humanistic thinking, ignorance of the things of God to an extreme degree. Professing to be wise, he has become a fool. No doubt, no doubt. Then he goes on to try and backtrack near the end of this essay and say, well, we should hope for the victory of these religious types of people because they also benefit society, is essentially what he's saying in the middle of page 235. And this is coming from somebody who's not ignorant of Scripture, because he says here, he quotes right out of Scripture, but does not give the biblical reference, of course. He pulls it out of his own ideas. See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil, and therefore choose life, that thou and thy seed may live. He puts it in quotes, but he doesn't reference the Bible. And then he goes on later on, and he says, the way to solve this, that challenge that has been presented, that he just quoted, he says, is from within. And he uses another scripture, a selective emphasis on Scripture, to reinforce his belief that this is the way to be able to choose the good, to be able to choose life, is only from our own human efforts and without any assistance from God. And he quotes, he says, it is not in heaven, neither is it beyond the sea to accomplish this challenge. But the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. And this time he doesn't even give quotes. So he's as if he's speaking this on his own accord. He's taking a scripture, which most Christians will recognize immediately, and using it to support his arguments, that is only from within our own hearts that we can meet this challenge and choose the good. Once again, displaying his absolute ignorance of the things of God. Oh, William James, how far you have fallen. As the flames of regret lick upon your heels to this day, had you only known the time of your visitation, you wouldn't have spoken that way, would you? And to see the legacy that you've left to the people who have used your ideas as a foundation for humanistic, atheistic thought. How far you fell, my man, how far you fell. You thought you had the world by the tail, didn't you? You could speak anywhere you want. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, all these famous universities throughout the United States, throughout Europe, you could travel and be accepted and feted and elevated and admired for your great intellectual prowess. And look where you are now, experiencing the flames of regret within your heart. Whether you be in a hovel in heaven or in a ditch in hell, it's of no care to me. I know that you're experiencing the flames of regret. He makes an interesting comment. Let's move on. Let's finish the next essay before we leave today. Do we have time? Yes, we have time. Let's finish the next essay. The next essay is called The Gospel of Relaxation. And in this essay, he tries to present the idea of not try so hard. Remember, Charles Bukowski would really appreciate this essay. A very inspirational essay, actually, and quite interesting. And not as painful to listen when he's talking about morality and ethics, which he bases upon nothing, which he bases upon the fallibility of the human heart. What a shitty foundation, a foundation of sand that is. He makes a comment here. He says, we're thinking more and more and working less and less. He says, if Homo sapiens of the future can only digest his food and think, what need will he have of well-developed muscles at all? I thought that was an interesting quote that he makes. As we move into such a state ourselves today, it seems we often are approaching that type of existence. And he makes an interesting quote. He says, there's very little difference between one man and another when you go to the bottom of it, but what little there is very important. I thought that was insightful. I thought I'd include that for you. He talks about the human life being social. And he says that the type of thinking, well, maybe I'll leave this out. He talks about the difference between American and European attitudes. And he says that Americans display too much eagerness, breathlessness, and anxiety. And they're not signs of strength. They're signs of weakness and of bad coordination. So he says that Americans are not as sophisticated as Europeans. Now, this is an interesting part that I thought was good. He says here, there's only one way to improve ourselves, and that is by some of us setting an example which the others may pick up and imitate till the new fashion spreads from east to west. He uses the example of a regional accent. He says that, or a regional turn of phrase. If some people use a particular common phrase in an area, everybody picks it up eventually. And then he says, if some people speak in a slightly different way, everybody in that area eventually picks it up. And he says this can be applied to positive things. He says, if you should individually achieve calmness and harmony in your own person, you may depend upon it that a wave of imitation will spread from you, as surely as the circle spread outward when a stone is dropped into a lake. Did you catch that? Let's try that one more time. If you should individually achieve calmness and harmony in your own person, you may depend upon it that a wave of imitation will spread from you as surely as the circle spread outward when a stone is dropped into a lake. And he goes on to use this to try and promote the idea of the gospel of relaxation, he calls it. To have a calm and undisturbed attitude. He says it's more reflective of Europeans and that Americans are too excited. So he's trying to promote this idea of the gospel of relaxation. But it's interesting that the way that he argues that certain particular local and regional attitudes can be picked up and become pervasive within a certain area. And so his argument is that if you have a good attitude, a calmness and a harmony in your disposition, this can spread within your immediate circle of friends, within your immediate family, and can spread within your community and your region where you live. Something to consider. That is a worthwhile thought. So kudos to William James for mentioning that. He says, one thing, be confident, others still will follow you. He says, even if you're following somebody else in this positive harmony, of one thing you can be confident, there will be still more others who will want to follow your good character. And he also says that the more unconscious one keeps in the matter, the more likely one is to succeed. In other words, he argues that this type of effort should be an unconscious effort. The more you try and do it as consciously, if you try and spread this idea of a harmonious disposition, it will fail because it's based on your conscious effort. He says it has to be like an unconscious effort where other people naturally want to imitate it. And he says we get this extreme example of this in through the mental disease he calls melancholia. He called it melancholia. Today we would probably call it anxiety and depression. These feelings of self, painful, intensely painful emotion about oneself. The feeling of feeling guilty, feeling doomed, feeling that you're lost, feeling that you're going to be annihilated, all these type of feelings, he calls them the disease called melancholia. And he says that's also can be easily spread from individual to individual. And he goes on to argue again, saying that who are those that are able to recite well or to speak well? Those are who are the most indifferent. So he says you must be indifferent to your efforts. You must not care whether you succeed or not. And you just go forward with this positive disposition and it'll catch on, so to speak, is what he's trying to argue for. And he also gives reference to Mr. Trine, Trine, and he was a significant motivational person that I've studied before, so I like the fact that he mentions his name. And later on, he goes on to talk about Brother Lawrence, who wrote The Practice of the Presence of God, the Best Ruler of a Holy Life, and he tips his hat to him. And he gives him as a good example of practicing virtue. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. And I'll just finish where he says the way to do it, this idea of sharing or starting the popularity of a new type of attitude, for example. He says the way to do it, paradoxically as it may seem, is genuinely not to care whether you are doing it or not. Then possibly, by the grace of God, you may all at once find that you are doing it, and having learned what the trick feels like, you may be able to go on. And that something like this may be the happy experience of all my hearers is, in closing, my most earnest wish. So this particular essay that he gives, called The Gospel of Relaxation, is a genuinely positive type of inspirational, motivational essay without this abandonment of God and the wholehearted adoption of humanism, pragmatism, the rejection of God as being simply a superstition. And instead, he even acknowledges this gentleman, Brother Lawrence, who dedicated himself to the service of God and commended it. So this guy is a little bit of an enigma, because on the one hand, he viciously promotes atheistic thought, and every once in a while he'll throw in conversations that sound like he is a theist, in a backhanded kind of way. So it would be interesting to have a direct and frank conversation with this individual outside of what he's writing for the public. It would probably be quite different, and my guess is that it would lean very strongly towards his genuine atheism, which he reveals in sort of a type of circumspect kind of way, that he doesn't want to put all his cards on the table, and he throws out these tidbits here and there of a appreciation of an acknowledgement of God with a capital G, but only in a way that appears to come across as very grudgingly, to say the least. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to bash him too hard, because he's not here anymore to defend himself. God rest his soul. And we'll move forward. We're on page 250, so we're down to the last 50 pages, and hopefully we can get through that. I hope it doesn't take me another video or two, but hopefully we can round this up pretty quick. Sorry for going on so long, but that's the next two essays, as I mentioned. That covers the Moral Philosopher and the Moral Life, and the Gospel of Relaxation. Even the title, The Gospel of Relaxation, is a bit of a blasphemy, so you can see where the guy's heart is, right? He didn't have an understanding, and now that we're pretty much almost done the book, you can understand one thing about this guy. There's a person's name that he never mentions in this book, and it's a reflection of his ignorance of what Christianity is. He talks about the absolute. He talks about a cosmic consciousness. He talks about a version of theism which is wholly embedded in a futile way of defining God. He has no concept of who the teacher was. He never mentions his name. He never mentions the name of the person that lived and did significant mind-altering, life-altering, universe-altering activities around AD 33. You know who I'm talking about, right? He never mentions his name, not once. It's kryptonite to somebody like this guy, right? This guy would not be able to mention his name, because it's so far from his humanistic, atheistic way of thinking that he would be absolutely diametrically opposed to his way of evaluating reality. It would turn up everything that he speaks about upside down. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'll have more to say about that probably when I finally finish and can make a more complete analysis of this work. Mind you, this work is a compilation, so even if I didn't finish the rest of the book, I would know enough about William James to share with you what he is known for and what he represents. He represents the foundation of humanistic thought. He represents the foundation of modern day atheism. Okay, so that's what William James is about. That's his legacy. Thankfully, he's not a household name, but I bet all the atheists know who he is. Anyway, thank you again for watching. God bless you very much. I pray you have a blessed day. I pray that you're doing better than I am, because I'm stuck slogging through this book that I never want to pick up again for the rest of my life. You can see that the edges have decayed so much that they're literally falling apart. It's as if time is destroying this book from the outside in. All this, it's disintegrating. This was published in, it says you can send away for a catalog. Oh, you can get this book for 25 cents. Simply send 25 cents to cover the postage. This was published in 1963. And the original copyright's from 1910. And this is by Pocket Books, division of Simon & Schuster. Anyway, this book itself is this physical book is over 50 years old, and it shows its age, and it's very, very difficult to read, small text, and it's barely divided into paragraphs. So I'll be glad to never have to pick this up again. So I hope you're having a better day than I am. I hope you're doing well. God bless you. Take care of yourself. I wish I had more to tell you today that would be helpful, but that's all I got. Thank you for watching. We'll talk to you again soon, though. We're almost done. After that, I promise I'll try and find something more interesting for you, okay? We'll talk to you again soon. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.